All right. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today, folks. We have a special guest speaker today, Amanda Janoo, and Amanda is the economics and policy lead for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, WEAll. Amanda is an economic policy expert with over a decade of experience working with government and international development institutions around the world. Her work aims to build just and sustainable economies through goal-oriented and participatory policy design processes. And I think I'll leave it at that. And if you'd like to fill in more about your background, you're welcome to, Amanda, but please take it away.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, evening to you all. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really grateful for Katie inviting me to speak with you all. I understand you're in quite an intensive sort of climate training course. So my hope is to sort of bring a more radical economic perspective to the type of transformations what we might seek in order to deal with the climate crisis. And so I'm just going to share, I've prepared a presentation, which is really about, why do we need economic systems change to combat climate change? And so I'll speak a little bit about the Wellbeing Economy movement and sort of the motivations and where it's come from, how it relates to not only the environmental, but also social and political sort of crises of our time, and then tell you a little bit about WEAll as well, and what our organization is and how we're trying to bring together actors from all over the globe to really transform this economic system. And so to start off with, I think, if we're going to talk about economic system change or the well-being economy, you have to start off with this question of what is the economy? Yeah. And so my sort of journey to the well-being economy movement began, quite a long time ago. But, I developed early on this sort of vision of the world as a bit of a Venn diagram. There's all of these various interconnected social, environmental, spiritual, cultural, political sort of challenges or issues, and felt that somewhere towards the center sat the economy. And if we could transform that, then we could, the impacts would really ripple out and improve all other areas of life. And so I started studying economics and was immediately very annoyed and confused. Because I wanted to understand how the economy worked. But all I really found was a bunch of like old white dudes talking about GDP growth rates and stock market values and supply and demand and all of these things as if they sort of mattered more than life itself. And so when you Google the economy, actually, the first image I found was this one. And I think often this kind of image is what we think about when we think of the economy. We think about, ragged sort of charts and graphs and sort of money flows. But ultimately, the economy is really just the way that we produce and provide for one another, right? So it's an aspect of life. It's a part of our societies that is embedded within like a larger planet. And it's always a means, right? It's a method by which we improve our collective quality of life. But the challenge is that somewhere along the way, we got a little bit confused between means and ends and started to really elevate the economy as if its growth, its performance mattered more than any other sort of indicator or aspect of life. And so as a result, we developed in particular, this indicator called gross domestic product, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And, it tells us how much is being sort of produced and consumed in a society in some way, at least in terms of market value. But it doesn't really tell us much about the actual quality of life of societies or the well-being of our planet, or how what we're producing or the way we're providing it is actually contributing to the ultimate values and objectives we have as a society. And so this focus really on viewing the economy as if its sole purpose is to just increase profits and wealth, and that is the major goal of society, has allowed us to get really good at economic growth. So you'll just see that it's been almost exponential, particularly since like the 70s. But the issue is that's no longer translating into improvements for a lot of societies in terms of, life satisfaction. And it's actually really harming, leaving a lot of people and species and ecosystems worse off. And so this group in particular, I probably don't need to explain sort of so much about the gravity of our environmental crisis, but we've really designed an economic system that does not place any value on our natural environment until it's transformed into the goods you see around you. And so that's why Amazon, for example, can be the most valued company in the world, while the Amazon rainforest isn't worth anything until it's chopped down and transformed into, some sorts of lumber or other types of goods that we ultimately then buy through the market. And so we have built this system of very much planned obsolescence. We're just trying to take as much from the earth as possible without any consideration of giving back to that system as well, in order to just make as much profit and to grow as quickly as possible. And it's not just the environmental crisis, but obviously we have extreme inequality, which is both within and across countries. So even since the pandemic, in particular, we've been hearing a lot about this. The billionaires seem to be the only ones who have really benefited. So, 8 billionaires now control the same wealth as like half of our global population. And sometimes when you're talking, if you're ever speaking with people about the issue of billionaires, one of the ways that I like to discuss it to understand how much money we're talking about is 1 million seconds is about 11 days, and 1 billion seconds is about 23 years. Yeah. So it's really, there should not be a billionaire. It is an unreasonable amount of wealth to have concentrated by any single individual. And it's ultimately a symptom of our current economic design, which is really about trying to, based on this logic that, if investors and shareholders and entrepreneurs have the most money, then they will invest that back and create jobs. And it's very much based on this trickle-down economic logic, which has really prevailed since the 80s, but which has very much proven itself to be untrue, as we've seen, because that wealth is not ultimately coming back down, and is just getting further and further concentrated in the hands of not only billionaires, but also certain multinational corporations that increasingly control and concentrate so much of the power and decision-making for a lot of our economic sectors. And then when you add on top of this, the very real mental health crisis that is plaguing a lot of societies with increasing levels of anxiety, loneliness, and despair, people feel really disempowered. And so depression is now the leading cause of disability. And when you add the COVID crisis on top of this, you really start to wonder, what is it all for, right? What is the point of living in the richest era in history if, the world's on fire and we all have to stand 6 feet apart from one another? And this can all feel obviously really heavy, particularly when it seems like our policymakers, in the face of all of these really existential and huge threats, still seem to just prioritize the economy as if that matters, and I remember hearing once, it seems like it's easier for us to imagine total environmental apocalypse than it is a different economic system. And why is that, right? Why is our imagination so limited when it comes to this particular aspect of life? And I think part of this, right, has to do with this standard policy story, at least amongst governments, where their primary objective is to grow the economy as quickly as possible, because then they can take some of that wealth through taxes to fix the damages done to people and planet in the process, right? But obviously there's got to be another way. There's got to be a way in which to actually get the economy to do more of the heavy lifting in terms of delivering the kind of outcomes and goals we have as a society, and not place that whole burden on the state to just mitigate or deal with those externalities, as economists like to discuss or call them. And so the good news is that obviously these realities are not lost on people. So we're in a really profound moment of sort of paradigm shift, with over half of the globe really believing that our current economic system is doing more harm than good, and really seeing it as a major driver of eroding democracies, of an increasing distrust in sort of government and its capacity to effectively deal with the crises of our time. And perhaps more hopefully, there was this recent survey last year that at least in G20 countries, so the supposed winners of this whole economic system, a huge majority, 74% of people, really want and see the need for their national priorities to move beyond a narrow focus on profits and wealth towards a focus on like social well-being and ecological protection, right? And so this sort of call to action, this recognition of what are our priorities as a society and what is the role of the economy within it, is really at the heart of the Wellbeing Economy movement. And so the Wellbeing Economy movement comes under a lot of different banners, right? So you get circular economy or solidarity economy, post-growth, degrowth, business for the common good, and many more. But really at their heart is this recognition that we have to stop treating people and planet like they're here to serve the economy and start treating the economy like it's here to serve us. And so I think part of this is about moving from this vision of the economy as this separate and distinct and supreme area of life to really downgrading it and recognizing that it's just a part of our societies that are embedded within a larger ecosystem. And so we have to start to elevate social and environmental goals so that then we can really begin to design and evaluate our economies by its contribution to them. So for example, and this is no small feat, right? Because economics, one, can be sort of intimidating, but we've also gotten really used to, for example, making the case for why health is good for the economy. But ultimately, we should shift that burden of proof and ask, how is the economy contributing to our health, for example, right? And that requires different kinds of information, but also a paradigm shift in terms of what the function of the economy is within our broader society. And so this is part of what the Wellbeing Economy vision is about, really saying, what do we actually want the economy to be delivering for us? And at least at WEAll, our membership sort of came together and identified these 5 WEAll needs, as we call them. And for us, it's really about building an economy that recognizes our need for dignity, right? So that ensures that everyone has enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness, but that it also is very much recognizes our need for nature, right? And that it supports a restored and regenerated natural environment, that it centers in our need for justice and fairness, so that we really are not just after the fact trying to mitigate the extreme inequalities, but really recognize that fairness, right? And a just distribution of time and wealth and power is really important for all of us to feel like we can meaningfully contribute and do what we want to do in the world. And then finally, it's really about connection and participation, right? So having a sense of connection and that we're part of institutions that we believe in, but also having a voice over how our economies look and are formed, and so that they can be more locally rooted, so we feel like we can take a lead in them. And so what does this sort of mean in practice, right? So a well-being economy respects and regenerates our natural environment. And this is really about, one, I think we've become very accustomed to understanding how humans can have a negative impact on the environment. And it's hard sometimes for us to even remember that we can have positive, roles within our ecosystem as well. And to recognize that there are economic activities such as regenerative agriculture, for example, where we can provide for ourselves while also regenerating our natural environment simultaneously, right? As well as really focusing on material circularity. And I think you've been talking about the circular economy. And so recognizing and respecting our natural environment so that we're not placing so much burden, but also giving back to it as much as we're taking, so that we're prioritizing not just growth, but balance. And it's also about, as I said, breaking the cycle of just growing the economy, then trying to fix it, and building a redistributive economy first and foremost, right? So how do we support social enterprises, cooperatives, and other kinds of like common resource governance systems so that we prior to the state's intervention, are already building systems where we work together and are ensuring a fair distribution of wealth and time throughout. And it's really at its heart as well, and I think this is very huge, about recognizing and encouraging meaningful work and connections, right? So we currently have built an economic system where there's almost a perfect inverse relationship between how much you contribute to society and how much you're paid, right? And so you have some of the most extractive and exploitive industries in the world and workers in the world being paid the highest, while those who are been viewed, for example, as the most essential, even during COVID, really be still getting very precarious and low paid salaries. And this is not inevitable. This is by design, right? Because if the purpose of the economy is to generate profits and wealth, then you encourage those sectors and activities that are the most efficient at it. But if the purpose of the economy is to promote well-being, then it's really about recognizing and encouraging our work as caregivers, our work as stewards, as artists, for the happiness and the well-being that they bring to a society and a community. And then last but not least, I think this is really important, is that a well-being economy has to reflect our local values and objectives. So I think one of the most damaging parts of mainstream economics and our current economic paradigm is this idea of this one size fits all, that across all space and time, when it comes to the way that we produce and provide for one another, people are always the same and all societies are the same. But the reality is that obviously the way we provide for one another is going to be influenced by our culture, our history, our geographies, our politics, and so much more. And so therefore its shape and its transformation should also be dictated by those contexts as well, and a reflection of our values and objectives as a society. And so all of that, it probably sounds great. Yeah, but wonderful. But how do we actually build a well-being economy? How do we get there? And so this was, the project of WEAll, and it's only been around for 4 years. So it's a fairly new initiative, but I can just say that, I think following the financial crisis, there was this renaissance in new economic thinking, and WEAll sort of emerged as a way to bring together those different ideas and initiatives and make them more accessible. With COVID, it's just accelerated massively. So people are really questioning what matters and what the role of our economy, civil society, and even governments are in sort of delivering that. And so our theory of change is really about first, bringing together the various ideas that are out there of illustrating what a well-being economy is and how we can get there, but also as a foundation for new narratives. And so for us, it's really also about moving beyond just critique of the current economic system to trying to really illustrate a positive alternative towards which we can open our imaginations and in terms of what the economy is and can be. And all of this to really fuel what we call power bases, or a movement of actors from all over the world, from all of these different sort of sectors or walks of life, so that we can build the mass movement, a new power base that's needed in order to really push and transform our economic paradigms and systems. And so the way we do this, we have a global membership. And so that's organizations, businesses, citizens from all over the world, as well as governments, who we bring together, connect, convene, and really amplify their work to illustrate that these, this different ways of conceptualizing, also building a different system is happening already, and to hold that under an umbrella or a picnic blanket, as we like to call it, of the term well-being economy. We also, try to bring together and create new power bases, for example, the well-being economy governments. So this is currently 5 governments that have all come together in a partnership and have developed alternative metrics of progress to GDP that really centers social and ecological well-being and indicators more, as the new metric of progress for the society, and now are trying to share best practice around how you actually transform your economic system and policy design processes in order to deliver and achieve those. And so one example that I really like from this is Wales. And so they've developed their Future Generations Act. Yeah, so they implemented legislation that went through a process of developing these new 7 well-being goals. And so this has become the foundation, those like what's in that circle there, like a resilient whales, more equal whales, a globally responsible whales, et cetera, that have indicators that they then monitor their national progress against. But really importantly, the thing I really like about WEAll as well is that they recognize it's not just about indicators, but about a different form of governance and decision making. And so they have these 5 ways of working because they recognize that the government needed to take a longer term perspective if they were going to do this, to move from just being reactive to the short term immediate crises that we're facing, and to take more a preventative approach in terms of moving upstream and thinking about how do we prevent these crises from happening in the first place. They also recognize that once you move from a narrow sort of bit like indicator of progress like GDP towards much more multidimensional ones that center on a holistic understanding of well-being, you needed to ensure integration and coordination across those government agencies. And that really at its heart, it's also about ensuring involvement by people. And so ensuring more participatory forms of decision-making. And so that's like an example of the high level, but we also don't believe that the change is going to come like just top down, and it really requires bottom up activities too. So we build and support to catalyze well-being hubs, which are place-based initiatives where various WEAll members and businesses and actors come together to really develop strategies and advocacy approaches that are appropriate for their context to build that sort of economic systems change movement there, and to support those shifts. And then, for us, one thing I love about WEAll is that, we envision ourselves as a time-bound project. So we don't plan to be here forever. Our hope is to catalyze, not micromanage the change. And so our membership often comes up with new initiatives that they want to do, like WEAll Youth was just an organic sort of initiative by a lot of our younger members, really wanted to focus these efforts more on university campuses and to really think about what this means in terms of youth advocacy. And a new area of work, and this is why I'm particularly excited to talk to you as well, is that we really want to connect in more with the movements, right? So like the climate change movement, and to see how we can support your advocacy by, developing materials or communications or narrative strategies that can help you to more effectively advocate for systemic economic reforms as part of the really powerful movement for climate justice, or in terms of racial justice and gender justice, for example. But ultimately at its heart, I would say that the Wellbeing Economy is really about just reminding people that we are the economy, that it is ultimately us, it is a system of our design. And so we have a right and a responsibility to sort of mold and direct it in line with our sort of values and objectives. And so with that, I will just conclude by really inviting you all to join as a WEAll member if you're interested, or also would love to sort of hear your thoughts on all of this, but also see how we might be able to collaborate more to align the work that you're doing around the climate action and the Wellbeing Economy movement. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was great. Before I forget, can I ask you at the end of this, will you send me your slides, please, to share with the fellows? That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. And I'll add on the slide as well. I realize that my email isn't there, but I'll also put my email in the chat now too, in case anybody wants to reach out after this.
Awesome, thanks. So folks, now's the time. If anyone has any questions, this would be the time. Yes, we're seeing lots of applause, so thank you again, Amanda. Really important. I mean, I have come to realize I did some work with the Sunrise Movement, and I really came to believe what you mentioned early on, that we treat people and the planet as disposable, my words, not the words you used, and that the way to address the climate crisis is really to address the root cause, which is treating people and planet as disposable. So it's really tied together. Does anyone have a question? And Katie, I know you're here and know a lot about this, so I invite you to help moderate and ask questions as well. Anything for folks? One question that I have while I'm waiting for others to get going, we've got some coming up here, so I will skip mine. Magda, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you firstly for sharing that. It's really inspiring. So I saw that you listed like a bunch of organizations that have joined, that are members and really care about this new paradigm shift. But what's the best way to make changes within, let's say, organizations that are very profit driven? Like, is there, I mean, that's like a really specific question. I guess I'm not asking for a solution right now because that's sort of a bit unfair, but like, is it about discussing a change in paradigm, like somehow internally, you know, is it programs? Do you have any ideas on how that's sort of done? As like a small change within an organization that's profit driven rather than making a huge system change straight away. Although I do realize that's like your long-term vision, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a really good question because we have a lot of members, and again, you can join as an institution or also as an individual. We have a lot of individuals who are part of larger organizations that might not be necessarily aligned with the mission, but they themselves feel very passionate about it, right? And so I think first of all, I'll just say for me, right, you know, I was working for like the UN and international development agencies for a long time. And so much of this kind of thinking was constantly sort of you're just naive. That's never going to happen. You know, like, let's be realistic, da, da, da. And coming to WEAll for me has felt like finding my people. Yeah, like there is a community of people who really want to think outside the box, who really want to sort of support and collaborate to think about how this action can happen. And so there's a lot of people who are parts of larger institutions that are not necessarily aligned with the mission, but who, you know, we had a term for this and I can't remember for what it is, but some sort of insiders, yeah, insiders who are trying to instigate this sort of paradigm shift. And so, for example, let's say, you know, there's a woman, Samantha, who works for the UK government, and she's developed like a little working group. This is around like new economy stuff, and she's trying to like bring awareness around new economic ideas and thinking and doing this more like sort of informal, slow, gradual way of like raising awareness about it within businesses specifically, right? I think that's also an important starting point of we do stuff around communication, right? And so you can think about if it's like a warm sort of ally, somebody who you want to maybe raise awareness of this kind of thinking, who you think might be able to be an ally within that organization to sort of advocate for those changes. But also, how do you communicate with the people who are going to immediately just, you know, reject this idea? How do you engage with those sort of like hard questions and challenges? And then that next step of, let's say you work for a very profit-oriented business, how do you connect in with the kind of other businesses who have illustrated how you can transition, right, to, let's say, a nonprofit sort of business model or a very socially and environmentally oriented and impact oriented sort of like business structure, and, you know, like to illustrate that those alternative forms are there, and to also find a community of practitioners who can support with that. But I think always starting off just with, and this is just my personal opinion, with one-on-one conversations with people, that's where this transformation starts, by building and connecting in with others who share this idea.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, Narayan, welcome. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Greg. Hi, Katie. Long time. I want to applaud you for what you're doing. It's much needed, definitely in terms of awareness, for sure. That's probably the first step, right? My question really is around, you know, how hard, or when you have organizations like the World Bank and the IMF pushing economic growth as a fundamental tool to create development, right, to reduce poverty. I mean, they work with a whole different set of metrics, right? And even when they work for, so I worked for the UN for a little bit of time. I still do some work for them, and I always wonder, you know, how, even though they publish the SDGs, 17 SDGs, right? Yet, you know, when I go talk to a World Banker, I live in DC, or an IMF guy, and, you know, I know people who run whole different countries and sections of the world. They don't understand the relationship between, I would say, inverse relationship today between economic growth and the effect on the planet. right? And it amazes me. So when I talk about circular economy, they're like, what is that? What is a circular economy? So, I think there is no awareness at the highest levels that runs the world on the economic and development front, which is, I think, very concerning, number one, right? So I think what you're doing is great. And I'm curious to know, how do you, it's great that there are 6 countries out there who are kind of aligned with you and you have gotten this momentum. But I'm curious if you're engaging with the UN or the World Bank or the IMF to kind of help them understand why it's important, and I'm curious if you have any success with that.
It's a really good question. I mean, so there's a couple maybe things that I will break down, I guess, around this. So one is, we have sort of strategically and purposely focused predominantly in high income countries, because we feel that high income countries are the major problem. Not only for our planet, but also in terms of our economic narratives, architecture and systems. And so I think that the onus sort of falls on the higher income countries to lead the way in terms of transforming their economic systems. But with that being said, we also recognize that even, the countries I mentioned are still part of a global economic architecture that limits their capacity in many ways. And so this is actually an important new area of work that we're going to focus on more, especially because we're starting to have a lot more place-based hubs that are focusing on that national level sort of advocacy and transformative work, or local level. That for us at WEAll Global, we want to bring more thought leadership to our global economic governance system, and what kind of reforms are needed at that level to even make space for greater self-determination. And I think part of that will be exploring and thinking about institutions like this, but it will also say that really exciting, I would just say, in the development sector. So it's not the IMF and the World Bank, but it's GIZ, which is the German Development Agency. It's like the USAID for Germany. They are this year's annual meeting, the topic is from growth to well-being, because they want to actually question whether or not this focus on economic growth, or what they call quality growth, is actually the major point of the development cooperation, and to really actually give opportunities for their staff and workers to reflect on these new kind of economic paradigms. So I find that to be incredibly encouraging that a development organization like this is considering it. Now, when it comes to, let's say, I recently spoke at a World Bank event, which was they're reforming their doing business ranking methodology for a few different reasons. But if people are not familiar with the doing business ranking, it's like the ultimate sort of neoliberal ranking system of just how few regulations do you have in your country to protect people and planet, and therefore how well are you at doing business, right? And so they're reforming that, and as part of that input, I was invited to be part of this group to provide inputs. And these arguments, right, that you should start with social and ecological goals and really think about how you can assess businesses' contribution to them. There was too much cognitive dissonance. And I think that economists are often the hardest people to actually convince of these ideas, because they kept saying, but that, the purpose of private sector development is just to grow businesses as quickly as possible. And to contribute to economic growth. And of course, they would say, of course we care about the environment and society, but that's for other, parts of society to sort of deal with, and not the role of the economy. And that is, it is an important sort of paradigm shift. And I don't know exactly. I think this is why we focus on a movement building strategy. So it's really about bringing together as many different, touching millions of hearts and minds, because I think it's going to take a mass movement. It's not going to come from top down, the people who are already in positions of power having an overnight kind of epiphany that this is going to be the kind of transformations that are needed. But with that being said, I think there are probably people who are within the World Bank who really would be, sympathetic and recognize some of the problems with our current economic thinking. And so back to Magna's point, how do we identify them, right? And work with them and to start to build, and instigate discussions maybe within those institutions as a way to start to shift ideas and dialogues. And I would also love to connect with you at some point. So we want to do more US based work. We also haven't worked in the US so much to date. And since you're in DC, or if anybody else is in the US, let me know. Because I'm trying to see how we can bring more of this international awareness to the US to help accelerate the movement here, and vice versa, of connecting US actors more with the global movement to help. Mm-hmm.
That'd be great. Thank you. Katie and Greg, if you don't mind me asking one more question, unless there's somebody else waiting. I would love to connect with you, Amanda, on anything on this topic.
Yeah, I just put my email here for all of you, so feel free to reach out at any point.
And Narayan, go ahead.
So the philosophical question, right? I get the fact that the inequality and the income divide is a problem, right? I think there are too few with too many access and power, more than the amount of money they have. Frankly, I think more money is personally not a good thing. It actually corrupts one's life, in my opinion. But above and beyond that, I get the fact that inequality creates challenges, and it doesn't really help the planet, and it doesn't really help everybody. But why this focus on profit? Is profit bad? Even for example, when I build a company or a startup that actually, makes progress and is innovates and things like that, right? Unless I have profit, I can't really build the company. I can't invest in it. I can't actually pay the salaries, right? I do need to do all of that.
Oh, I think you just muted. I didn't hear the last part.
Where did I drop off? Sorry. I think I was saying, is profit not important for entrepreneurs and innovators to do good things? Why is profit bad? Or am I misunderstanding what you mean by profit being a problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So this is a very big sort of it's a really big question and point. And one way, maybe also somebody you should invite to speak to you. There's this woman, Jennifer Hinton, who's amazing. And she really focuses a lot on the topic of not-for-profit business. Yeah. So not nonprofit organizations, but not-for-profit business, and ways in which there's examples and a lot of other ways in which profit is reintegrated into the society, right? And into the environment. So it's not that you don't have profit, but it's what is the purpose of that profit and how it is being used. Now, I should also be very honest here that my background is very much more in economic policy, and I'm not an enterprise level sort of expert. But what I will say is that I think from my perspective, it's not even necessarily profit is bad, but I think what you need to be clear on is value, right? So there are certain things that you can produce which are really genuinely contributing value to a society, right? And so let's say if we build a house together, right? And that's something which is a home, and it's something of value that is provided to a society, right? And we would want to make sure that, we build it in a way together that then all of us are able to get a fair share of sort of the time and the effort and things like this. And also because it's something that's maybe more valuable than the sum of its parts, or it would then allow us to, build some more houses. Now, this is different also from us then renting, building the house and then us renting out the house to somebody, right? In the sense that is not something you're actually providing real value for, but you're just extracting wealth from somebody else, right? And in that sort of sense. And this is actually something that even when GDP was being originally designed, they wanted to exclude certain kinds of activities from it, like rent seeking activities or different kinds of sort of negative activities for a society from being a part of that value creation. They also wanted to include household work, Simon Kuznets, as a part of it. And there's a lot of things that are are part of what do we actually view as value? What do we value and view as valuable? Now, I think I will just say for myself, but I also don't like I should say that we're very much an organization which is around togetherness over agreement. So what I will say, my personal perspective is not always a representation of our whole organizational perspective, but I do think it's important for us to spend some time really reflecting on where profit comes from. Yeah, because I think we've become too normalized with this idea that taking more than you're giving is okay. Yeah. So having a system where you actively try to sell something for more than it's worth, right? Or buy something for less than it's worth as that mechanism for making profit for ourselves is a fundamentally ethical sort of problematic starting point for a way to structure a system, because an economy is fundamentally a system of reciprocity. It's a way in which people and planet provide for one another. And it's important to build systems of reciprocity amongst a lot more people, because then you can have a much higher quality of life. But if the motivating factor for every one of our interactions is for me to use my power to, let's say, you're moving out of the country and selling your car and you don't have time for me to swindle you and buy it for way less than it's worth, then that's problematic as like the starting ethical point for how we're exchanging, right? And structuring this system. But this is my, personal sort of perspective on it, but would be interested to hear other people's as well.
So you seem to be saying it's more about intent and values, right? They are much more important, and profit, I guess, can be good or can be bad if the intent's wrong, right? I mean, that makes sense to me. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. And Chris, go with your question, please.
Thanks. Yeah, this is fascinating. I think Narayan's questioning and your responses have been really helpful for me. So I work a lot for the World Bank on energy access and particularly working to deploy solar mini grids in mostly sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world where there's less electricity. And I find myself kind of mulling over what has been discussed in the last 10 minutes or so, because the World Bank model seems to be, there's 500 million people that need electricity, and the way to do this is to deploy these solar mini grids and get them to scale as much as possible, which involves profitable businesses in this field and encouraging people to use electricity more for agricultural processing and so forth. And I'm wondering where the philosophies of this WEAll movement fits in particular around sufficiency, I guess. Like where do we how do we help folks get enough electricity? Because a small amount of electricity can go a huge way in providing lighting, getting folks off burning kerosene and other, burning other things for small amounts of light and so forth, and really helping increase the well-being of people, but also doing so in a way that doesn't kind of further perpetuate the conveyor belt of global capitalism in a really destructive way. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, this point around enough, I think is really at the heart of a lot of this this work, right? So I'm from the United States, and we don't have any notion of enough, right? Like that's not even part of our public rhetoric, because it's like sort of conflicts too much with this idea of ambition and growth and bigger and better and all of these things. And something for me that I remember when I was doing a project in Mozambique, there was economist who was explaining to me that like their culture just like needed to change. They needed more time for their culture to change in order to develop sort of, to achieve the development that they sort of needed, and articulated this in the sense that investors would come, people would show up to work for a couple of days and then just leave go back to their communities and wouldn't come back until they need more money, right? And might be a couple of weeks, might be, you know, like whatever. And he was like, they lack a work ethic. And I was like, oh man, no, what they have is an understanding of enough, right? Like how much money they need and like in order to, you know, achieve the quality of life for their community. And I was like, well, I don't have that, right? Like how much is enough for myself, right? Like when do I know if I've like sort of achieved what I wanted to achieve? And I think that's a big part of the point here, is that right now our metric of progress is how quick we're growing, not if we've achieved what we actually want to achieve as a society, right? And I think that it's not just the indicators, but it's also, it feeds into our culture, right? Our identities, our own understanding of our like sense and purpose. And so it's not purely just technical fixes of alternative indicators, but as you say, clarity on what is a good life, right? Like what does success really look like as a society? And then what needs to grow and what needs to decline in order for us to achieve that, right? And so I think this is the point, is that, you know, I love the degrowth people. I'm like very grateful for them. But I also, you know, I also often, and I think there are a lot of areas that need to decline, and like in terms of the way we've currently structured, but it's not so much about degrowth as growth of what and why. Yeah, like what do you want to grow and why? And always asking that question of why, and which economic activities and behaviors do you want to have expand? And also recognizing that oftentimes as non-monetary or non-material aspects of the economy as well, right? So we want more time, right? Like we want more capacity to like care for one another and connect with one another and celebrate or whatever, right? And so it's just about thinking a little more holistically and having clarity on where we want to go, and then what you want to support and encourage and reward in order to sort of get there, based on, or what it needs to sort of sunset and decline to get there. I don't know if that's answers your sort of question here, but yeah, it's a really important, I think, point around how do we know when it's enough, right? Or when we've arrived, as it were, to the kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I find myself thinking, there was an interview with the guy that Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote the Ministry for the Future, and he was talking about this ultralight backpacking movement in the United States, and how that's an interesting metaphor of how, as when you're backpacking, if you have too much stuff, you're literally suffering because you're carrying too much, and it's difficult to climb up those hills and so forth. And how do you know, how do we have as little as possible so we can engage in a beautiful, meaningful way with those around us and with the environment, and have the stuff that we are carrying, you know, as useful as possible, as functional as possible, but also really as little as possible.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where I think, probably because I come from an international development background, I still think that a lot of these alternative well-being metrics, or these different metrics, still oftentimes preference a Western worldview and still try to preference certain Western like economic and political structures. But if you were serious about assessing a society's development or progress by its level of health, like how much happiness or they get from unit of material consumption, like the US would definitely be like very low, like the lowest on that list, right? It would be the least developed. And so I think it's also about shifting our paradigm of like, what are the indicators of success for us, and what can we learn also from other cultures and communities that are able to, because I think there is a big part of that sort of cultural part too, of recognize that the things that matter most for us often are social connection. Yeah. And how do you really build a system that is about fostering good social connection? And I think that's something that I always think we get lost about when we talk about the economy, because it's easy to focus on money and things, but really any time that we give to other people, boosts our immune system, reduces our stress level, and reinforces social trust. Yeah. And so like we are very hardwired to want to provide for one another. And that's a big part of our identity and, you know, and our sense of self and connection. And so how do we build economies also that acknowledge that more, sacred, connective part of it, and not just the competitive like aspects too. I see there's a lot of questions also in the chat. I don't know. I just want to like acknowledge that there's some there and I don't want to like lose them, but I also don't know if we've only got like 5 minutes. I can stay a bit longer too, but I want to respect all of your time as well.
Yeah, I was noticing as well, it's a little hard to prioritize here, but I know Ed is with us and I'd love to just get his question out and then we can hopefully get to a couple of things in the chat.
Great, thanks, Greg. Sorry, I'll just try and get on my video. Oh, almost. Yeah, great. Thanks, Amanda. I suppose coming straight to the point with one particular thing, it worries me when we do talk about well-being, and not that I don't believe in it and it could be a much better world if that was our focus, but actually we've run out of time to try and convince the billionaires and the corporations and everybody else to get on the well-being bandwagon when we have 5, 6, maybe 7 years at the outside to decarbonize the global economy, which doesn't seem to be going so well right now. And it seems to me that, I'm not saying no one should work on well-being, but it seems to me that the absolute huge focus should be on getting ourselves decarbonized in the time available, because if we don't, there'll be no well-being for anybody and the thing will unravel as the global tipping points go. If we do get it done, there is going to be a bit more time to achieve levels of well-being all over the world.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, so are you in the UK?
Can you tell by the weather?
Yeah, no, but it's like but this is one of the things also. So the term well-being economy was kind of just chosen when we started. We've actually been pretty surprised at how much it's been taking off. I think it's just because it's a little more descriptive than a new economy, right? Around the direction that we want to head, but particularly in the UK, oftentimes people think of it around wellness. Yeah. And so it resonates in certain places more than I think others. But for us, it's really important that it's not just about society, it's about society and the environment. And I think I really agree with you around the point that, and this is something I've been trying to experiment as well with some more, because oftentimes when you ask people what matters for well-being, they tend to focus more on social sort of dimensions and not as much as the environment. And so bringing in more clarity around, okay, well, can people and planet sort of provide for one another, or how do they provide for one another in a way that supports our well-being? I agree with you. I think that again, with that sort of diagram, it's like, economy is one part of society, which is embedded within a larger ecosystem. If we prioritize the well-being of the environment, it will ultimately support the well-being of society, right? And so like around that sort of hierarchy, but I do think entry points for this kind of paradigm shift are different for different, societies and communities and things like this. But the time point is huge. And obviously for us, we're trying to build this sort of movement as quickly as possible, but also I want to share with you an article that has been really inspiring for me, which is by this Indigenous leader, which is called "The Times Are Urgent, So We Must Slow Down." And there's something like, there's just so much wisdom in there, because I think sometimes I'll leave it to you to look at it as well. But I think the type of transformations we seek are going to take a little bit of time, because they're not just technical. And I at least personally don't think technology is going to save all of this, because it's a systemic structural issue that we also have to change. And I do think that transformation can happen probably more quickly than we think, because paradigms are changing so much right now. But I also, it's not going to be overnight, because when you change a whole system overnight, in my experience, that's a recipe for disaster as well, right? And you'll have total collapse a lot of the time. So it's about balancing these two things of figuring out how we facilitate this transformation, so that we're we really are focusing on harmony and balance with our natural environment, but and like animals and biodiversity, and not just climate, right? But the biodiversity crisis is urgent and important as well. So,
Well, thank you, Amanda. I do want to point out that we are at the hour, and thank you for offering to stay on, but I did want to respect folks' time, and we understand that some will have to drop, including me, actually. I have another meeting, so Katie, can I ask you to continue? Can we stay for a little bit?
I can, Greg. Sure, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes, Amanda. If you've got more time, let me have a look in the chat. I see a few people are dropping off. I think that there were. I had one question from my side as well. I think there was, which I might put together with a couple that came up here. So we had one, I think, on kind of how well-being compares to indicators like human development. And one that I had that I think might be interesting for our cohort in particular is the relation to the donut economy. So I don't know if maybe we could just to sort of talk about this question on how it compares to different indicators and particularly that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say, well, one thing, Kate Rayworth was like one of the original sort of founders of WEAll. And so again, for us, it's not about saying the wellbeing economy is distinct from, but it's meant to be sort of an umbrella or a picnic blanket for a lot of these different initiatives. And so the donut is like a really important, I think, tool towards trying to, reconceptualize the economy and help it to move within, that planetary boundaries. And similarly, like the Human Development Index, right? So a lot of this beyond GDP stuff really came after the financial crisis. And there are, at this point, thousands, of what we call beyond GDP or alternative indicators for national progress. And we try to be agnostic about it a bit, because people are really intense about the ones that they think are the best, and really just try to support communities and governments to go about the process of sort of developing them and be a critical friend, as it were, right? Because oftentimes, let's say if the environment's totally missing, then that's something for us that's really important to try to raise awareness of. And we also believe that the co-creation of these metrics with society is important, because it's not just about articulating this alternative vision of progress, but internalizing it. So people themselves feel like this, this new vision of focusing on, let's say, health and social connection and meaning and purpose and clean air and water and all of these things, right? That is their understanding of a good life in society as well. But I would say they're all part. It's all part of this movement, and not something, separate or distinct.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much, Amanda. I think I'm looking to see if any more questions, if there's anything that we've not covered, now would be the time. Otherwise, I do appreciate that you've already taken so much time, Amanda. I'm so glad you came in to talk.
Oh,
to hear.
Absolutely. I mean, I always like the discussion part the best too, because I'm just so interested to see how people react, and please invite anybody if they have questions that come up, or if any of you can reach out to me sort of anytime. And it'd be great, Katie, I'd love to talk to you at some point as well around any ways to potentially partner more also with this sort of project and initiative too.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for all your awesome questions as well. Thank you for sharing your contacts and your presentation as well, Amanda. Would be great, and it was lovely to see so many of you. And I'm gonna close this off now, but take care and thanks again. And see everyone hopefully in some future talks. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Chris. Wait,
Oh, hi, Katie. Bye, Katie.